Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thank you, and yes, thank you to NPS for inviting me. Yes, it's in my bio. It's a joke that I always drop that I spoke at Harvard, because if you've never met anyone who went to Harvard, you tend to know that pretty quickly. So, and we've had all this talk today about technology, and I still print out my notes and use a highlighter. So we're just going to go with that. Usually I do write about satire. I'm afraid today I have much less funny stuff to discuss because we'll be talking about Putin's war beyond Ukraine. So why did I choose that title? That's because I would argue that the war going on in Ukraine is the kinetic part of a much larger global war. And there is actually a war going on here at home in the United States and in Europe, which is affecting us on an almost daily basis at this point. So the Ukraine war is not happening in isolation. It's also being fought here. We often tend to call this hybrid war or shadow war, but I hope you're going to leave here today and understand it's just war. This is from the director of Germany's external intelligence services. Whether we like it or not, we are in direct confrontation with Russia. The Kremlin is using its intelligence services as the spearhead in the fight against the West, with a state mandate, with all that means at their disposal, without legal restrictions, and above all, without conscience. And I want to bring you back to this fact that this is done by their intelligence services. This isn't, we often, when we talk in this country about Russian interference and these types of things, we're thinking social media and these types of things. This is a state-run, organized campaign out of the Kremlin using Russia's intelligence services to try to destabilize the West from within. According to Czech intelligence, and the Czech Prime Minister actually said this publicly, in Europe in 2024 alone, there were 500 suspected incidents of sabotage, arson, other types of active measures, and up to 100 directly attributed to Russia. There's probably even more than this. You're talking more than one attack a day, even if you take the lower number of this. We're being attacked on a daily basis by Russia, organized by their intelligence services on orders out of the Kremlin. These are attacks on infrastructure, they're cyber attacks, attacks within the information space. So why? Why is Russia doing this? Why is Putin doing this? Well, I'm going to bring you back a little ways, back to when Putin was first in power. In 2000, he gathered his oligarchs, and he took them here, to Stalin's dacha, just outside of Moscow. Now, I don't know how much all of you know about Joseph Stalin. He was not the nicest guy, responsible for killing about 25 million of his own people, starving people in the Ukraine, setting up a really nice gulag system, really not a good guy. This is where Putin brought his oligarchs. Stalin also had his main enemy, Leon Trotsky, killed by an assassin he sent to Mexico to stab Leon Trotsky in the head with an ice pick. The oligarchs arrive here at this lovely dacha, and Putin says, I'm going to let you all continue looting, taking all the private wealth of Russia. There's just one condition. I get half. Well, the oligarchs took a look at their lovely environment, and they said, you know what? We're okay with that. This developed into a very corrupt system. This is from 2019, so before the full-scale invasion. 98 Russian billionaires held more wealth than all of the other Russians combined. A lot of that wealth was held outside of Russia, but again, it's a very corrupt system with Putin at the lead. The result of this kind of corruption is that you had a total merging of criminality and the state, that Russia essentially became a mafia state run by gangs and thugs, with the state being the biggest gang around. Sitting at the very top is Putin. Russia is a mafia state today, and Putin is its top godfather, as Garry Kasparov, the chess champion and Putin opponent, has said. The result of this mafia state is that everything and everybody inside of Russia is working for Putin. Anything can be a tool of statecraft. Sometimes the orders are coming directly down. Sometimes it's just general guidelines given, and people sort of understand, if we do this, we'll be pleasing the top guy. So what happens when you end up with this type of a system? First thing is that you need an external enemy. You need somebody to blame. Because you, Russians, you're not poor because of me and the oligarchs stealing from you. You're poor and you're destitute because of the West doing this to you. We need an external enemy. Additionally, Putin has this desire to return and restore the empire of glory days past of Russia, what they imagine the glory days of Russia were once like. They've even changed their patriotic education system to make people think and realize Joseph Stalin wasn't really all that bad of a guy. And there really was this wonderful empire, and now we're trying to recreate it. This requires, in the end, a conflict with the West. This requires a conflict with NATO. Because part of the issue as well is this existence of democracy. Because again, you're not poor because of me, you're poor because of the West. And I can't have, if I'm Putin, I can't have this democracy existing next door. Because my people might see it and they might start asking to have the same thing. We can't have that. So, if I'm Putin, I need to have a conflict with the West. But I can't fight a united Western alliance. So I need to find ways to destabilize it from within. That's why the conflict in Ukraine is completely interconnected with what's happening here in the West and the destabilization efforts that are going on right around us. So how is Putin bringing this fight to us? Active measures. You've probably heard this before. But I'm going to read. This is from Oleg Kalugin. He was the former foreign counterintelligence head of the KGB. He says it's not intelligence collection. So this is not espionage in the way that we normally think of it here. Certainly not the type of espionage generally that the CIA was doing. Not intelligence collection, but subversion. Active measures to weaken the West, to drive wedges in the Western community alliances of all sorts, particularly NATO, and to sow discord among allies. These attacks include attacks on critical infrastructure, espionage, but again, not necessarily espionage in the way that we generally think of collection. It's not necessarily stealing secrets. It could be espionage in the sense of spying on critical infrastructure to see what we should be hitting, taking photos of naval bases, these types of things. Violence campaigns, weaponized migration, and influence operations. Generally speaking, these types of operations are designed to disrupt and they're designed to intimidate. They have plausible deniability built in. This is part of how they do this. Sometimes it's overt, but most often these types of attacks are covert. And it's made so that it's really hard to find the evidence to point the finger directly and say, yeah, we know for sure that this was Russia. They also tend to be below the threshold of war. They're trying to get us with little pinpricks everywhere, but they never want us to actually respond in any big type of a way. If a cable is cut in the Baltic Sea, when you're going to launch a missile at Moscow, what are you going to do? It's a very asymmetrical approach to war, and it's very difficult to respond to. I think it's we are discovering. Previously, these types of attacks were being carried out by Russian intelligence operatives. We've all heard about the assassination attempt of Sergei Skripal, for example, in Salisbury, England. That was done by GRU officers, military intelligence. A murder in Berlin of a Chechen dissident, also done by the GRU. However, several years ago, both in the United States and in Europe, we kicked out all of their spies, most of them. As of this morning, it sounds like many of them might be coming back. But the result of kicking a lot of these people out was that Russia then lost many of their networks within the US and with Europe, and so they had to start using proxies to do this. They had to recruit people in new and innovative ways to carry out these attacks on their behalf. And that's what we're seeing. This is from the US Helsinki Commission. This is from since February of 2022, so since the beginning of the war, the full-scale war, up until November of last year. This is a map of all of the suspected and attributed Russian hybrid operations in the US and in Europe. So again, there's almost certainly more than this. But again, you can see if you add it up, they're hitting us basically every day. So let's look at some specific examples of what they're actually doing to us. Let's look at some attacks on critical infrastructure. Let's look at Poland. Now, Poland is actually a really interesting case because of its geography. It's right up against Ukraine, and it has become a hub for supplies that are going into Ukraine. Most of the weapons and aid that we're sending is being sent on trains and airplanes that are going through Poland. Our VIPs travel on that special train that we often hear about from Poland to get to Kyiv. So Poland is a big central player in everything that's happening here. Last year, they arrested dozens and dozens of people. Many of these people were carrying out attacks that were basically aiming at targeting the supply lines to Ukraine. These were low-level people. Some of them were almost teenagers, maybe 20, 21 years old. They were recruited through Telegram, which is so it's a bit like WhatsApp, if you don't know what Telegram is. They were recruited through Telegram, so they were recruited online. Lots of times these young people were online looking for something else. In one case, a guy was searching on Telegram to buy weed, and eventually was approached by what it turns out was a Russian intelligence officer on the other side who convinced him to go and do a few things. Recruitment through Telegram and through other online sites happens very much like we see in intelligence recruitment elsewhere. We're going to ask you to do small little things first to prove that you can do it and I can get you to do these things, and slowly we're going to ratchet it up. So we're going to start with really easy tasking, and then we're going to slowly increase it. So for small amounts of money, at first, these groups of people were asked to hang up posters. Sure, we'll go around Poland, we'll hang up posters. They were pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine propaganda, but really, for 20 euros a pop, what's the harm? Soon they were being asked to scout out Polish seaports and a naval academy. Then they were asked to place cameras along railways, again, where those weapons and the other supplies were being delivered to Ukraine. Then they were asked to place tracking devices inside military cargo if they could get access to it. The idea then was that Russia could track all of the movement of the missiles or whatever arms supply it was until it gets to Ukraine, at which point they could put a missile on the tracking device and they could blow up the weapons. These same people who were recruited through Telegram were asked to set fire to transport hubs. And soon enough, they were being asked to try to derail the trains. So you start with a poster, and soon enough, we're asking you to derail trains. Again, as with any recruitment within the, sort of the intelligence cycle, if any of you have worked in that, I'm guessing some of you out there have. By the time you get to them asking you to derail trains, you've already compromised yourself now several times. You're too scared to go to the authorities. You're too scared to say, wait, I think maybe this is a step too far. The airport in Poland as well, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. They were asked to place cameras facing the airport runway. But you also had human espionage. A worker at the airport was arrested for spying on the arms shipments. She was supplying that information to a staffer who worked for a politician who was in the Alternative for Germany party. The staffer has been arrested. The woman at the airport has been arrested. The Alternative for Germany politician is still under investigation in Germany for spying for Russia. That same woman who worked at the airport was also spying on employees of Rheinmetall, which is one of Germany's largest defense companies. Again, they were going through the airport, and she was spying on them, again, as a way to try to get information on what types of material Rheinmetall was supplying. We've already talked a lot about drones today. We're going to talk a little bit more about drones. But I have to turn the page again. Okay, so the drones are interesting because, again, each one is an isolated incident. Doesn't really necessarily seem like much, right? And we had drones over New Jersey, and okay, that was interesting, and maybe it was aliens, we don't really know. But when you sort of add up where it's all happening, you start to see a much bigger pattern. In Norway, they had multiple sightings of drones over energy installations. In Sweden, they've appeared over energy installations, police stations, and also at airports. They actually shut down one of the airports for several hours. Several airplanes had to be diverted. The United Kingdom, drones have appeared over several Air Force bases where US military have people stationed. Again, real world consequences. When they appeared over these bases in the UK, about 80 electronic warfare specialists had to be called up special to drop everything else that they were doing to come out and try to figure out what was going on. So this is using up our resources, using up our time. In Germany, there were repeated drone flights over an industrial site. That particular industrial site houses a liquid natural gas terminal, a brand new one, which is meant to replace LNG that was coming from Russia. That particular LNG terminal had had holes drilled into the pipeline, 6 holes drilled into it. Nobody knows who it was. The drones were flying over this very same industrial site where this pipeline was. Also within that industrial site are several chemical companies, a mothballed nuclear site, and again, the floating LNG terminal. And it's also at the very strategic location of the entrance of the Kiel Canal, which is where a lot of our military boats pass into the Baltic and the North Seas. At one point, there were so many drones constantly buzzing over police stations that the police then in Germany then put their own drones up. Their own drones couldn't keep up with it. So they actually called up the German Air Force. And the German Air Force went up and chased off the drones. And the German officials believe that they were these Russian Orlan 10 drones. So not a commercial drone by some hobbyist or some kid flying it. They believe that these were Russian drones. These particular drones have a range about 500 to 600 kilometers, which by chance is about the distance from Kaliningrad to the Kiel Canal. They can fly at over 100 kilometers per hour. The problem has gotten so acute in Germany that they actually recently, like within the last 2 weeks, passed legislation to allow for shooting down of drones over sensitive sites. Now, are all of these Russian drones? We don't know. But again, we have deniability built into any types of these attacks. So it's very hard to say. One isolated incident of drones over a police station or at an airport, that's one thing. But when we start to see them all piling up, it does start to paint some kind of a pattern. Okay, let's talk a little bit more. Critical infrastructure, transportation, and commerce. So in July of last year, 2 packages were sent from Lithuania. One was sent to Leipzig, Germany, and another to Birmingham, England, through DHL. Those 2 packages caught fire. They were both found to have had incendiary devices, that is, bombs, inside of them. Now, by chance, those flights were delayed, and so the bombs blew up before they were ever actually put on the airplanes. 2 similar devices were later found in Poland, also at a DHL facility. Again, you can see these aren't small things. If these had actually made it onto the plane, the chances are things would have gone pretty badly. It was later found, the Polish Prime Minister has publicly said this, I can only confirm that Russia planned acts of air terror, not just against Poland, but against airlines across the globe. There's been reporting about this that Biden and Jake Sullivan actually at the time approached Russia to say, don't do this. It turns out that the GRU, it seems, had a very large plan to put these types of incendiary devices, again, bombs, on cargo and passenger planes that were bound for the United States and Canada. Now I ask you, you're all DHS type people. DHS was set up in the aftermath of 9/11. That's when we first started talking about critical infrastructure much more seriously. Replace Russia with Al-Qaeda, replace it with ISIS, and tell me what we would call this type of a plan. Let's talk a little bit about water and wastewater facilities. Back in the Cold War, the USSR actually had plans. They had mapped out our water systems, both in the United States and in Europe. They had sleeper cells prepared and ready to poison the water, turn the water off, do all kinds of things to our water systems in the event that our Cold War should turn hot. Those plans remain in place. We know that attacking water systems is very much a high priority for Russia. Attacking that type of infrastructure has been a key top thing that they've been doing repeatedly in Ukraine. This is a water pipeline, I think near Kharkiv, that has been hit where they put explosives on the pipeline to blow it up. Of course, you can imagine the problems that this causes. People no longer have their water. Within the United States, we've had cyber attacks. These don't always turn into huge attacks, but sometimes they do lead to do not drink orders where we have to boil water for several days. There's a psychological impact, everything that goes with it. So again, outside of the war zone, this is inside the war zone, clearly critical infrastructure is a top target, but also outside. And they use very creative ways to do it. So I told you before that now, with the way that Russia is set up, everybody is used as a tool of statecraft. The Russian Orthodox Church is one of those tools. We know this. They do all kinds of cover for Russian operations. This is not from too long ago, 2 years ago. The Orthodox Church actually was mapping the water system in Kirkenes, Norway. Again, not an isolated incident. The Russian Orthodox Church has been buying up real estate where they can overlook airports, where they can overlook water facilities, where they can overlook all kinds of critical infrastructure. All of this being bought up by the Orthodox Church. This particular case, through the guise of a friendship program across the border, we just want to look and see how you're running your water networks. The mayor of Kirkenes shut that one down and said, there's no way. You're not going to do it. In Norway, in just the first 6 months alone last year, 11 water facilities had break-ins or vandalism, both. Some of the break-ins happened 2 nights in a row at the same location. And these aren't attacks or crimes of opportunity. These types of facilities are isolated. They're at the end of a very, very long road. You're really making an effort to get there. They require tools to break through the gates and to break the locks. Now again, you ask Finnish authorities, well, so who was it? The problem is there's no evidence. There's a cut gate, and there's some vandalism inside. Nothing was stolen. We don't know if they touched any of the valves, if they did anything with it. We now have to tell everybody to check their water until we know for sure that it's safe. But there's a paucity of evidence to be able to point for sure who it is. But again, when you see this type of thing, we had similar incidents in Sweden, in Germany, and in France. Arson attacks as well. This is a commercial shopping center in Poland, set on fire. The Polish believe that this was a Russian attack. Again, people probably recruited through Telegram to set fire to a commercial mall. Other sites have included an IKEA, a paint factory, and a number of facilities that belong to weapons manufacturers who just happen to be manufacturing weapons that are going to go to Ukraine. Back to Rheinmetall, again, their employees were being spied on at the airport in Poland. One of their Berlin factories actually caught on fire, and their security officials believe that it was a Russian sabotage attack. Just a few weeks ago, another Rheinmetall explosion, this one in Spain. Again, we don't know, it's still under investigation, but it starts to add up. In fact, When you look at all of the different ones, we've had BAE had a fire, and 2 separate General Dynamics plants have had explosions that are still under investigation. I would remind you again here that deniability is part of what is built into these types of attacks. They are meant to be below the threshold of war. They are meant to be difficult to attribute. Okay, weaponized migration. There's evidence of a state-run, organized human trafficking from Russia and Belarus. They are luring people from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and elsewhere. They are luring them to Russia and Belarus with promises of jobs, promises we can get you into Europe, promises of family vacations and all other things, whereas instead they then push them over the border into Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Sometimes these people are armed. They're aggressive. They're told to be aggressive and attack when they get to the other side. One Polish border guard actually has been killed. And another really interesting aspect to this is the dynamic that this causes within Europe. So this is why they're called hybrid attacks. So Russia starts recruiting these people, bringing them in, and then pushing them over the border. Okay? Now within Europe, you have all of these fights about migration. We have way too many people. We need to send people back. These eastern countries that are actually on the border there with Belarus and with Russia, they're now starting to put up fences, barbed wire fences and walls and the rest. And they're actually sending people back, forcibly sending people back. That then adds to the internal destabilization within Europe, because now you're having a political discussion about what migration should look like. There's EU humanitarian law which says these people are seeking asylum, so we have to allow them in. And you have others who are saying, but this is human trafficking being forced upon us by Russia and Belarus, so we need to send them back. So not only do you have the physical attack of sending people over, but then you have the influence, the information attack going on, pushed through social media, through news, through all these others, which we're going to get to amplify this idea that migration is an issue to be exploited and to cause this destabilization within our own political debates. And again, these crossings, this migration has huge uptick since the beginning of the war, and particularly within the last year. So it used to be, 3 people would cross in a month, and now it's several hundred a day. So it's a lot of people. They also are carrying out violence campaigns. I'll just go through some of these quickly. There have been assassination plots against the CEO of Rheinmetall, again, that German defense company. Italian intelligence picked up SIGINT, signals intelligence, where the Kremlin was plotting with Wagner. This is before Prigozhin was killed, but they were plotting with Wagner $15 million to kill the Italian defense minister. Graffiti, which these are Stars of David that were put up shortly after the October 7th attack, the Hamas attack in Israel. These were put up all over Paris by a Moldovan couple that was recruited over Telegram by their Russian handler to do this. They had a photographer with them as well who took the photos. Those photos were then distributed through all of these influence networks that we're going to talk about in a minute. Same time, same people. They did red hands, which are a Palestinian symbol. This is on a Holocaust memorial in Paris at the same time. Again, you can imagine the internal anxiety that this causes and the arguments, the polarization. So it isn't necessarily that Russia supports one side or supports the other side. They just know if we put these up, people are going to get anxious and we're going to cause problems inside, right? And it polarizes us even more. These are coffins that were left at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. Same group of people, also recruited through Telegram. They were offered, I think, 200 euros to do this. Coffins that were then draped with the French flag with notes on them saying French soldiers in Ukraine. Estonia has arrested a lot of people. Some of the group, they had vandalized the car of one of the ministers in Estonia. The same day that that car was vandalized, a journalist who had been researching these types of attacks in Estonia, his car also was vandalized. Bomb threats we had in our country here during the election, on election day. Bomb threats were called in. They were coming from, or emailed in, they were coming from Russian servers to US polling stations. But again, not an isolated incident. Across Europe, they've had very similar types of bomb threats called in for schools, hospitals, embassies, government buildings, all kinds of different things. All right, information operations. This is actually my favorite, because this is the one I know best. All right, the purpose of information operations. As we discussed before, the main purpose of active measures is subversion. Information is a really great way to do it. Russia's information operations are designed to change behavior, opinion, belief systems of an individual or a society. Okay? It really is kind of social engineering in its own sort of a way. This helps to put pro-Kremlin narratives into our public square so that we're discussing them, but they've entered into our public square not from Russia. They've entered covertly, so we think that they're coming from our own, which makes it much harder for us to say, but no, that's Russia saying that, so it's bad. No, it's coming from our own people, people with familiar faces. A misunderstanding about influence and information operations, they are not necessarily designed to make you believe something. So I'm not necessarily trying to convince you who blew the MH17 airplane out of the sky. I'm going to present to you so many narratives that you're going to step back and say, you know what? I just don't know. I don't know what the truth is. I don't know how I can ever figure it out. And the problem with that is that people then remove themselves from public debate. Now, what is democracy if it's not active civic participation? So if I can get everybody to say, oof, I just don't know anymore, or I'm so tired of all of the arguments, I just don't want to participate, you've weakened democracy already right there. So how are these types of operations done? Again, these are human intelligence operations. Most of the influence operations that we've been hearing about in this country, we hear about the Internet Research Agency and trolls and bots and these types of things. So I think there's a real misunderstanding that this is just online and that these are just trolls and bots sort of spreading things. These are human intelligence operations. These require recruiting humans, paying humans to tell you certain information. It isn't ad hoc. It is organized. They have metrics. They have budgets. They have key performance indicators. We have the documents that show what those are. They are coordinated with the Kremlin. These are state-run. This is not happening ad hoc. We have examples, again, where the guidelines, the talking points have come directly from the Kremlin down to the people who are carrying it out. And then we also have people who are designing the plans and the programs and the different influence campaigns who then are briefing it back to the Kremlin on a weekly basis. So, what types of things are they doing, the Russians? Well, they are finding politicians, journalists, and other influencers. They pay them to promote certain narratives. Again, once it's in the system, they may spread organically. But in many cases, people are paid actually to say very specific narratives. Within that, people, we literally have examples, for example, of journalists receiving articles that are written by their Russian handler. Literally, like here it is. One guy complained. He's just like, well, it's not really well written. Well, too bad. Put your name on it. And he did. And it was published in a Swiss magazine. Politicians have also been paid to introduce pro-Russia legislation. Generally speaking, the legislation is focused on we need to lift sanctions on Russia. We need to recognize Crimea as Russian. We need to end aid to Ukraine. They had success in both Cyprus and in some regional Italian legislatures, where the legislation, again, that was literally written by the Russian handler, was handed to the politician who put it into the parliament, and in Cyprus and in some regional areas of Italy, that legislation actually passed. Also, there's been a lot of involvement in independence and secessionist movements. In Catalonia, Spain, for example, the GRU has been implicated in helping with that independence movement. The Texas secessionist movement, the California secessionist movement, Brexit, and Veneto, Italy. So why is there this interest in these independence and secessionist movements? It's the same idea as trying to break up the EU or break up NATO. It's to break that unity. So if I can break Italy from the inside, or if I can break Spain from the inside, or if I can break the United States from the inside, that really helps me if I'm Putin. Because again, it's that united Western alliance which is the only thing that can hold him back. Separated, each part is too small. So here, most of you probably are familiar with RT, which used to be called Russia Today. It's a state-run propaganda tool. The editor-in-chief, Margarita Simonian, has compared RT to the Ministry of Defense, just so you know where they're coming from. They view their information operations as much of a weapon as anything that's coming out of their Defense Department. Simonian has said, we are waging an information war with the entire Western world. Now, a number of years ago, we sanctioned RT, both Europe and the United States. We sanctioned RT. We kicked everybody out. And as a result, Simonian set about creating an entire empire of covert influence aimed at Western audiences. So what do those look like? Let's talk about one. Well, we're going to talk about two. First one, Voice of Europe. So the Voice of Europe was a media platform that was set up out of the Czech Republic. It was broken up last year, 2 years ago, now I forget, by Czech intelligence. It was running Kremlin propaganda in 16 different languages, and it was funded by Viktor Medvedchuk. Now, Medvedchuk is a pro-Russian Ukrainian oligarch. He has been charged with treason in Ukraine. He was being held under house arrest, but then he was exchanged by the Ukrainians. They exchanged him to get a number of POWs back. So Medvedchuk is now hanging out in Russia. The Voice of Europe, not only did it spread the propaganda, but it was also used to funnel at least 500,000 euros to EU politicians, allegedly. These include politicians in France, Poland, Hungary, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And in Germany, a different member of Alternative for Germany was actually caught on tape by Czech intelligence getting his money from his handler and counting it, allegedly. He's still a member of AfD, by the way. So some of the narratives that were pushed on this media platform. Ukraine will never be welcome in the European Union. Ukraine is to blame for the war. Ukraine is corrupt. We should not be sending any weapons or aid to Ukraine. Ukraine should be making concessions. And European involvement in Ukraine risks escalation. All of these narratives are designed, again, to not let anybody help Ukraine so that Russia can try to beat them without help. The idea being, we want to make it as scary as possible for the US and for Europe to get involved in any of this. Because again, Putin can't actually fight us if we stay united. So let's look at an example here in the United States. Tenet Media. This was last year. The Department of Justice issued an indictment against two people from RT. Unfortunately, they're in Russia, so we can't get to them. However, here in the United States, the two founders of Tenet Media, so let me tell you first, if you have not heard of Tenet Media, it's a media company that was being run out of Tennessee. It is a media platform for some very big right-wing influencers, including Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and these types. The founders of Tenet Media were former RT employees. Again, RT, basically part of their Ministry of Defense. They were Canadian, they're Canadian and Russian. They are possibly helping now the Department of Justice. Not sure where any of this stands anymore, but the two that were here in the United States were not arrested. So the two RT employees that have been indicted are in Russia, but the two who founded it on behalf of the Kremlin here in the United States also were former RT employees. We know from documents and emails, those two founders, they knew that they were being paid by Russia. Some of the influencers were paid $100,000 a week. Now, to be sure, they have said publicly, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, those guys, they've said we had no idea that that was where the money was coming from. But the Kremlin was willing to pay a lot of money to have them say it. RT content was amplified covertly. So there was other information that was coming out through this media platform that RT was actually writing and was being fed into this system without anybody saying, hey, this is actually coming from RT. And they successfully directed messages from Russia. For example, after the terrorist attack last year at Crocus shopping mall in Moscow, if it was very clear, the evidence was there, it was ISIS. ISIS claimed it, there was evidence pointing to ISIS. Everybody quite quickly came to the conclusion, this was ISIS. But if you're Putin, never let a good tragedy go to waste. Let's find a way to blame Ukraine and the United States for this terrorist attack. So, direction came from Moscow to Tenet Media, hey, can you get somebody at Tenet Media to say, this was Ukraine and the United States? Well, commentator number 3, we don't know who it was, said he would be happy to do it. So again, this is actually directed messaging from the Kremlin coming out through American faces to an American audience. Again, if we talk about our covert empire that RT is building, it's almost certain Voice of Europe, Tenet Media, these are really the tip of the iceberg. There are definitely more. I can even give you more examples if we have more time, if you're interested. There's a lot more going on. So what? So I want you to come away from this today understanding that there's a coordinated and state-run campaign to destabilize the West. It is being run out of the Kremlin. It is trying to destabilize us, and that Russia is at war with us. So what are we going to do? Well, I would argue that the best thing to do is to stay unified with our allies and to help Ukraine win. It's a very possible thing to do. It was, I would say, until this morning. If you've read the news, they seem to have hatched a plan in Riyadh, which is not doing this. But a unified West could still actually win this thing, I think. And I think that we should, because as I said, and I think that I've pointed out, Russia is at war with us. They are attacking us on a daily basis. And so I don't think that we should be having bilateral talks with them to give them what they want. So that's it. That's the end. And I'll be happy to take any of your questions.